And thanks everybody for joining early. I appreciate your promptness and your enthusiasm about tonight's program. I think it's going to be a whole lot of fun.
This is the series finale, right?
This is the series finale, believe it or not.
We're at the end of season 1 of Climate Consciousness.
Oh man. Oh man. All right. I think we can go ahead and get started. My name is Max Colley. I'm program manager for the Museum of Life and Science in Durham, North Carolina. And this evening's program is brought to you by the Museum of Life and Science, as we believe that right now in this unusual moment, effective and clear science communication is of extreme and utmost importance. The title of this evening's seminar is Collecting Data, Advocating Change, and Building Resilience. And our esteemed panel this evening will speak to one or a few of those different aspects as to what we see are next steps towards climate consciousness and keeping the conversation going. All of them have wonderful insight into helping you figure out how to better stay in the loop, create and promote dialogue, advocate for your neighbors and communities, and support the learning and scientific understanding of climate change on a local, regional, statewide, or perhaps even national level. Let's go to the next slide. Before we get fully underway, just a really, really big thank you to our partners. Many of y'all, I believe, have been joining us over the past now 7 weeks, 6 programs, and this whole series would not have been possible without our incredible partners, many of whom are on the call here tonight. So thank you to the Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association, SciStarter, the Museum of Science in Boston, the Durham County Sustainability Office, IC Change, the Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, and of course, the North Carolina Climate Office. Let's go to the next slide. And of course, this resource was prepared by support of award NA18SEC0080008 from the Environmental Literacy Program of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, the U.S. Department of Commerce. The statements, findings, conclusions, and recommendations are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of NOAA or the U.S. Department of Commerce. Great. So we have a whole lot to talk about this evening and less time than I'm sure we would all like. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our very first panelist, Keisha Satterwhite. Keisha, take it away.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I really want to be able to say thank you for allowing me to be part of your process this evening. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about climate change and the Watershed Academy itself. Okay, so I work for the Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association in Durham, North Carolina. And I want to tell you a little bit more about the Ellerbe Creek before we get started this evening. The Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association is a nonprofit organization here in Durham that really is working to restore a healthy living creek that really is wanting to connect nature and people. We protected our first 6 acres in 1999. And since then, we've been able to acquire an additional 450 acres, which also includes 5 nature preserves. In addition to that, we also promote innovative stormwater management, of course, to help improve water quality, but also to help residents enjoy and appreciate the outdoors, an environment that is really safe and conducive to learning. Now, when you think about resiliency, what is your definition of that? For me and for Ellen Choi, resiliency really is about putting those decisions about things that impact our daily lives and our basic needs back in the hands of the people so that they can really figure it out themselves. It really is about building those relationships that really thrive. And it's not all about just individuals in the ecology, but it's also about making sure that we have good relationships with each other. One of the things that the Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association has been fortunate to do is really to participate in a number of community-led events prior to COVID-19. And as we're participating in those events, we really have learned quite a few things. We've learned to listen to learn, but also learn to listen. And that simply means that when it comes to resiliency and community engagement, one size does not fit all. What works in one particular community may not work in a different community. The other thing about what we learned as we're out in the community is that they really wanted educational opportunities to learn about green infrastructure, watershed, and there's something called the Goose Creek that really is running through a lot of the neighborhoods in East Durham. They wanted opportunities to participate in job opportunities and workforce development, and also strategies for eliminating and reducing flooding in their neighborhoods, but also resources around climate change. So Thomas Jefferson said, to learn, you have to listen. To improve, you have to try. What we've done is create a program that really is focused on most of the vulnerable urban communities. And with our partners, we've been able to develop a few projects that are around reducing stormwater flooding impact, creating those job opportunities for community residents, giving them access to fresh, healthy foods, but also creating a natural habitat in some of our highly urbanized neighborhoods. What that looks like for us is a program called the Watershed Academy. Now, the Watershed Academy was specifically designed to help young people understand the importance of polluted stormwater runoff. It was a program that we started in January or July of 2019 for kids ages 8 through 16 to have this specific focus. That one-day session was a hands-on session with 4 different components. And when the participants of the Watershed Academy left, they were equipped with tools to learn how to improve water quality, but also to become environmental stewards for the East Durham community. That turned into our current version of the Watershed Academy, which I'm calling 2.0. Now, Watershed Academy 2.0 began last Saturday, September 19th, and these are the new members of the cohort that's going through the Watershed Academy at this time. What that looks like is, instead of being a one-day program, this version of the Watershed Academy is a 4-month community development opportunity that still focuses on those local urban watershed planning and stewardship, but it's also equipping the participants of the program to lead land conservation efforts, such as clean water initiatives, community garden projects, and flood mitigation best practices in their own neighborhoods. We have 3 objectives for the Watershed Academy. It really is to build our community capacity in watershed planning, land and water stewardship, and also around nature-based stormwater management and design. We really do want to be able to enhance the community's development, again, around those green workforce development training opportunities. And lastly, we want to have an opportunity to increase the capacity of our local partner organizations. Because just like the LB Creek Watershed Association, our partners are doing similar work. And so working together on it makes us a little stronger. Here is what the Watershed Academy curriculum looks like. There are 6 different modules. Module 1 really is around preparing them for the process and talking about watershed management itself. Module 2 really dives deep into flooding and water quality. We'll talk about urban stormwater runoff, ways that we can start to reduce our environmental impact and land use management. We talk about stewardship projects and how to be able to implement those projects. And then finally, each person of the Watershed Academy has opportunity to present their environmental project. Now, we have a goal for the Watershed Academy, really is working with 2 different communities in the Durham neighborhood, which is East Durham and the Bradtown community, over a period of 4 months. in order to produce 10 community stewards who are leading those environmental projects and efforts in their community. For us to be able to lead and have this type of work happen in our communities, we are working with a number of partners that are making this possible for community residents. Now, because of COVID-19, we really had to rethink our approach to how we were going to deliver the Watershed Academy. And we turned to an online platform called Schoology. Schoology is a cloud-based learning environment that really allows us to create, manage, and share content, not only with participants of the Watershed Academy, but also with our partners. This is a quick view of what the dashboard of the Watershed Academy looks like. As you can see, all 6 modules are inside of here. And this is like a deeper view of what that module looks like. It really is information and several different steps for us to be able to go through the program and provide those educational tools. I do appreciate your time this evening. And if you want to learn more about the work that the LB Creek Watershed Association is doing, feel free to follow us on Facebook, check out our webpage, or email me, Keisha Satterwhite, keisha@lbcreek.org. Thank you.
Keisha, thank you so much. I think that this is such an incredibly special program, and I really appreciate you sharing your insight and wisdom with us, because I think that there's a lot of folks on this webinar this evening who can make use of a lot of the resources that you so generously shared with all of us. So I really appreciate it. Before we go to a few more panelists, I am going to talk just a little bit about what happened last week, which was our community forum about extreme precipitation, which many of y'all so generously lent your time and voices to. Peregrine, if you wouldn't mind sharing that slide deck for me. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, cool. So there were 17 different combinations of plans that y'all had through this experience, right? Between those 3 basic resilience strategies and those 2 ways of making a decision, you had choices between choosing a bunch of less expensive strategies. You could have chose nothing, which is strategy 17, which you perhaps will not be surprised to see did not actually show up here. But you also could have chosen, as many of y'all did, a strategy where you spent 2 of your sort of checks on a more expensive resilience plan and then a less expensive resilience plan. What you're seeing right now on the screen is how your individual resilience plans sort of looked. This doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but bear with me for a second. Let's go to the next slide. Here's your group resilience plans. We essentially asked people in this forum to make one before having a deliberation with a bunch of people, and then to make a second resilience plan after deliberating with a bunch of people. And you can see, let's go to the next slide, these 2 plans look really different from each other. And I actually think that this is really, really significant. You'll see that not only are there fewer plans, but a lot of y'all all kind of came to consensus separately in small groups about which plan you kind of liked. And as promised after last week, I would like to share my screen and show you what some of these plans kind of look like here. So welcome back to Rivertown. Hopefully y'all can see my screen okay. Rivertown, like we mentioned, is actually based on a real city. You have like 3 more seconds to try and figure out what that city is if you thought of it before, but it might help if I zoom out just a little bit. And of course, as we continue to zoom out, there's Michigan. Rivertown is Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it's based off of real dilemmas going on in that very real city. And the real dilemma of flooding happening during extreme precipitation events is not particularly unusual either. What we're using right now is some story maps that were built by this project to help visualize not only some of the dilemmas going on there, but also some of the decisions you made. So here is our wonderful city of Rivertown, and here it is again after a 100-year flood event. And all of y'all who joined us for the forum were essentially asked to figure out what to do about this thing. What should Rivertown do to build resilience against basically this happening again. I want to give you some tools for using this again on your own, but I also want to show you the 3 biggest strategies that y'all selected. This first one looked like this. It's an expensive soak it up plan and a less expensive inform the public plan. Our plan, your plan, puts a lot of money towards the soak it up strategy and a small amount of money towards the inform the public strategy. Once completed, the downtown and suburban neighborhoods of the city are protected from what's predicted to be a 100-year flood, but the northwest parts of the city will remain vulnerable to flooding. By investing a large portion of money in the soak it up strategy, green infrastructure will be implemented throughout the city. Vulnerable parking lots and alleyways will be repaved with porous pavement. Roads will be restructured to include green space, and gardens will be placed around stormwater drains. In addition to these changes, the city invests a public education campaign to educate groups of people on the hazards of extreme precipitation and builds renewable microgrids for hospitals, police stations, and fire stations. While these upgrades will help decrease the amount of flooding in the city, some people are unhappy about these impending updates. Flooding will still affect farmers who are worried about their crops being killed by the excess water inundating their field. Permeable sidewalks are causing problems in the winter as snowplows and shovels are getting caught on the bricks, leading to uneven pathways for pedestrians. And local schools are upset that they were not chosen to receive funding to build a microgrid to keep the power running during extreme weather events. Let's check back in with our city here. Let's see what the flooding looks like having implemented this strategy. And it looks like even though we have put in the strategy, even after, there is still flooding going on down here, even if it isn't happening up here. Let's see what else happened through your strategy. So we have some green boulevards for roadways. Looks like you've got some porous pavement that was installed. Some stormwater drain planters. All right, and let's see some of your impacts from Inform the Public. Looks like a renewable microgrid was installed. And there's a public safety program to educate residents about heavy precipitation. And of course, an emergency alert system was put in place. One of my favorite things about exploring this interface is remembering that this was all based off of learning about our stakeholders, those people we spent a lot of time talking about in the beginning. Let's think about what happened to them. So this is after you've implemented your plan, and Renter Rex, new permeable pavement, creating potholes. Okay, schools demand equal commitment for emergency preparedness. Land flooded by storms. Farmers call for help. If we go through the other plans that were implemented, these other 2 that were very popular, Soak It Up Plan A and Keep It Out Plan B, and then the last one being Inform the Public Plan A and Keep It Out Plan B, you'll see that they all kind of have trade-offs. And that's a pretty large and important learning outcome for this activity on a grand scale, that it's not that there's one perfect plan, but there's trade-offs to all of them. Now, rather than reading through all of this by myself, I would love to give y'all the opportunity to get to explore the impacts of your implemented plans on your own. But because we have a really, really excellent group of panelists, and because I know how tempting it is to explore this as soon as it's dropped in front of you, I'm going to wait until after our panel this evening to give you the link on how to explore your own resilient strategy and how it impacted Rivertown, or should I say Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm going to stop the share there because I have just a few more things to reflect on before I turn it over to my friend Julia. Peregrine, could you? Most excellent. Okay, there's another fascinating learning outcome aside from just what happened to Rivertown. And that's that this forum has been done in a few different ways in a few different parts of the country. So if you look up here on the left, this was the basic decision made by groups here in North Carolina. But something like this forum was also done in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is right next to it, Portland, Oregon, Boston, Mobile, Alabama, and Honolulu. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you that there's kind of an interesting pattern emerging there, that y'all are not the only ones who came to some pretty significant consensus on which strategy seemed most interesting to you. Let's go to the next one. One of the most interesting things that I find about this is that one takeaway we can take is that 51% of you changed your resilience plans after you had a short deliberation with your peers. There's two big things we can think about measuring with this. One is changes in knowledge, and one is changes in opinion. So often, changes in knowledge post deliberation and discussion amongst peers can suggest evidence of learning. I would posit there's a great deal to be learned from the experiences of others across our state. In fact, I would say that perhaps some of the best learning that can happen from a very personal experience, like how you experience climate change, which is also how you know about climate change, comes not from reading about it or listening to an expert talk about it, but rather from each other in peer groups. We're all experts in what happens in our backyards and neighborhoods. And given that, I believe the best way to learn about how climate change will affect your neighborhood is by talking with your neighbors. The change in opinion, that one is really tricky. Did you change your opinion because you were on the fence before? Did someone genuinely convince you of their point of view? Did you do it because you were moderately convinced and willing to compromise towards making consensus? Did you perhaps just think you were running out of time or not care enough to fight against a majority? To better understand some of those complex dynamics, we need more information. To start, do you even agree with the decisions that you just saw reflected? Do you agree with the opinion that you came to consensus to in your small groups? Sometimes more than half of the groups in those small group sessions report that they disagree with the decisions their group made. How does something like that happen? I think it's important to remember that consensus building through deliberation is not necessarily that everyone actually ends up having the same beliefs or perspectives at the ends. It's a complex and important process that's not fully understood, and it's a science unto itself. But here's what I think. I think the fact that 51% of you changed your answers at the very least suggests that you were open minded, open hearted, and willing not only to listen to your peers, but also to do the hard work of taking in new evidence and perspectives from your neighbors, analyze it, and use it. Perhaps you didn't truly change your point of view, but sometimes a compromise is just that. It's the ability to figure out what parts of your opinion you can or cannot give up on or be flexible with, and which parts you can. Evidence from deliberative experiences like this seem to suggest that people are more willing or able to change their point of view on something if they deliberate with others about that topic, as opposed to just reading through materials. I'm going to borrow some words from my wonderful colleague, Nick Weller at ASU, who I think is on this call this evening. In other words, it's the action of deliberating that facilitates people changing their views on something. It's about more than just the information provided. That's what issues like this come down to, after all. In cases where information and data alone are not enough to make what's fundamentally a value based judgment, conversation and deliberation with our peers is necessary. We have to go into these without an assumption that there's a singular point of view, a single right answer, or even consensus that can or should be reached through deliberation. We have to understand that we all have something to teach and something to learn from one another. So, what's the generalizable advice here? How does this relate to resilience? Some of y'all heard me last week that I believe that building community, or in the case of the forum, a micro community about climate resilience, is its own good resilience strategy by itself. I very much believe that communities, friend groups, neighborhoods, talking about those climate change with those is good practice in looking out for one another and ensuring we're able to support and understand one another through whatever happens in the coming decades. Peregrine, if you could go to the next couple of slides, there's some amazing data from the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, or YPCCC, that I reference pretty often that I think is really relevant and worthwhile to bring up here. Let's go one more into the future. So first of all, in 2020, there was an increase in people who self-reported as believing in global warming or climate change. So around 72% here in the US. If you go to the next slide, 63% of people, still a majority, said they're worried about global warming. If you go to the next slide, 61% of people said they believe it will harm people in the US. Let's go to the next slide. There's a bit of a drop. Is it already harming people in the US? It's at 56%, about half. Let's go to the next slide. Will it harm you personally? We're under half in the US now. Most people do not believe they will be directly harmed by climate change. Unfortunately, this is not the last slide. Go to the next one. Do you discuss global warming at least occasionally? We're down to only 35%. Only 35% of people self-report that they talk about climate change at least occasionally, even while 72% of people say they believe in it and 63% of people say they're worried about it. By the way, more people in 2020 said they were worried about or that they believed in climate change than in 2019. That is not true. The same amount of people say self-report that they talk about climate change between those 2 years. For me, the takeaway here is pretty simple. If we're going to build the political will to take on climate change, it starts with the lowest hanging fruit, and you're looking at it right now. We need to talk about it more. If you've learned anything from the 6-part series, which I hope you've learned a lot, it's that climate change is your business too. And it's not just for climate scientists to talk about. Now, I understand that this feels uncomfortable and challenging, but building the skill and talking about it will help you and in turn help your peers get better at it. And I think that the potential and power in our deliberative conversations that we talked about just a moment ago, to perhaps have a better opportunity not only to help build knowledge, but also to help change minds. And I hope that you leave this series feeling like you have that power, because you do. As journalist William Greeter said, creating a positive future begins in human conversation. The simplest and most powerful investment any member of a community or organization can make is to begin with other people, as though the answers mattered. We have a lot to contribute and learn from one another. So even though our series ends this evening, I hope that we will keep this conversation going. I'm going to drop that link to continue to explore the story maps about your decisions from our deliberative forum. If you happen to miss that, we have a makeup one coming up on Tuesday, but there's so much other wisdom for us to learn about tonight, and I'm really, really excited to turn it over to my friend Julia. Julia, you ready?
I think so. Thanks, Max. And I am ghosting as Caroline Nickerson tonight, but I am Julia, and it's all good. And thank you for that fantastic presentation. I am just so energized and thrilled by this community, the Museum of Life and Science. That is literally it. We're all living life and science every day. So hold on. Can you guys see my presentation slides? Good? Okay, cool. We invented IC Change, and what you left us with is such a perfect segue and so central to what we do. IC Change we designed it to understand climate change in your daily life experiences and the little details, the joys and our challenges, to create a safe space for neighbors to talk about those changes together, and ultimately to deliberate and make decisions. And that's the thing about resilience decision-making, adaptation decision-making, climate change decision-making. It is really nuanced stuff. It requires trade-offs. It requires us to empathize and understand each other's lives, and get outside of our own. So I started IC Change. Let me see if I got this right now. Yay. When I was a climate science reporter. My background is actually in anthropology. So social science, physical science, doing a lot of physical measurements in the field. I was the geekiest high school student. I was the youngest member of the Harvard Archaeological Field School. Don't even ask, it's a long time ago. But I ultimately became a climate science reporter. And I'm a Gulf Coast native. I was raised on a barrier island on the Gulf Coast of Florida. And I've spent most of my last couple decades in New Orleans. I covered the Asian tsunami in 2005 for the Associated Press, and then came home and covered Hurricane Katrina. So, but my proudest accomplishment, I think, is being a mom, and why we do this, and why I do this. But most of all, if you've been working on anything with us in North Carolina, you've been working with my incredible team who helped me with this presentation tonight. Sam Harrington, who is our senior reporter. She reports for Yale Climate Connections as well as us and manages our digital community. She's incredible. And Lindsay Wagner, who is the awesome genius behind most of the great things you see on IC Change. Our mission is to connect people to each other and their changing environments to make solutions together. We are mission-oriented. We crowdsource and analyze community microdata to inform project planning and design, but really connecting people through stories and thinking of stories as one of the most powerful forms of data. And we use our platform to mobilize communities to share that. Stories, photos, and data all together, these weather measurements that can actually create dialogue around these issues. You remember, your neighbor is your first responder, right? Someone you need to know and talk to, and has this automatic shared experience. What connects people better than the weather and climate and being a neighbor together and sharing that space? And so our goal is to build community power and cohesion in response to these issues. And that means the first step is just paying attention to it. So again, we're trying to make this space appeal to as many people as possible in the broadest way. So we have lots and lots of ways you can engage on the platform around the kinds of weather and climate impacts you happen to be experiencing or noticing. And for example, a daily experience in North Carolina might be around pollen. What's great about this picture is that it just kind of, it's so visceral, right? And so frustrating in the sense that somebody washed their car 2 days prior. So you understand the kind of the intensity of the experience, right? And what does this kind of tell you? Well, it probably tells you something about the growing season, starting early or maybe being warmer. It will tell you about allergies in your community. It'll tell you about local water, because there's a lot of water that will be washing all this pollen away. So there's a lot that can be told just from a story and just from a photo, but we'll go into more details. So this is how you create an account on ichange.org. You sign up in a very similar way than you would a traditional kind of social media platform. And you pick topics that relate to you. So in this particular example, we're talking about rain gauge data that you add to a post potentially around flooding. We do a lot of work on flooding, rain-fed flooding, sea level rise flooding, and combinations therein. But we also have data entry now for urban heat islands and urban heat monitoring or heat monitoring. And we just added air quality data entry to the investigations to kind of in response to a lot of folks using icy change in these last wildfires, and even a guy in Tokyo who's been doing some great work. So again, in North Carolina, we've been hearing, listening deeply to this community for a while. We've been hearing about extreme precipitation and flooding, sea level rise and combination as well, drought, extreme heat, allergies, tropical storms and hurricanes, changes in our gardens, and pollution and air and water quality issues. So for example, one of our favorite North Carolina Icy Change members who's been with us for years is Vicky Autry. I believe some of y'all might know her. And we've written stories about what she's posted on Icy Change, and I encourage you to read them. She's fantastic. But this is a very common occurrence lately. She is matching her rain gauge with a flooding event, and we do track that over time and can model it. And what it comes down to is that your experience matters. These stories matter. And I'll just run through why and how we've used some of the data in different areas of the country so that you understand how it all adds up. Basically, when cities are often making decisions around climate impacts, they are seeing the problem like this. They're using models which are not granular enough to make block by block decisions, and even satellites and sensors are missing tons and tons. It's hypothetical data, and most importantly, it's lacking context and granularity. And I can go into many examples in which we've seen the models be inadequate. Also, another issue is that we don't include residents in our typical public meetings. Y'all have done pretty much an incredible example of civic action and civic activity. But the truth is, to be a citizen, an active citizen, takes a great deal of time and effort. And we're missing a lot of people at the table. So even in your Zooms around this, who is missing at the table to make the decisions alongside you? I guarantee you the people who are often experiencing climate the worst have the least amount of time to spend on weeknights or weekdays, even in a virtual sense. And really, again, we're missing so much when we don't include their experiences. So how might we, in a design sense, create more equitable participation in the decision-making process? And that's where IC Change has done its best work. In Ocean City, we have worked with community members to document flooding, both tidal flooding and rain-fed flooding in combination. So we have members keeping rain gauges, and we are, syncing all of the data according to tidal data, and taking pictures of the same places over time, and really have seen this community gather around solutions that are working and then advocate for solutions in other neighboring towns, and actually encouraging those towns to join IC Change. It's been pretty powerful to see. We worked in Harlem a long time ago now, but still really seminal work, where we put sensors inside people's apartments and monitored indoor urban heat waves, and proved that those heat waves behave differently than outdoor heat waves. We're from the South. I count North Carolina as the South. It legitly is. But a lot of folks in the Northeast don't have ACs. And so what does that do in a building where you don't have access to AC? We've actually now extended this work in New Orleans and in different ways around the idea of being in the South and how different it is. And I can talk to you about that later. And then here's our work in New Orleans on stormwater and infrastructure work. This is one of the most recent examples where we actually use the community source data to document flooding at very intense flooding at very low storm level profiles. So what we would call a 2-year storm event or a 5-year storm event. We documented 29 in this particular community, and we, in collaboration with the engineers, proved that the modeling was not adequately accounting for the level of flooding this community was experiencing. We actually were able to save hundreds of thousands of dollars in the design process, and were able to double the flood capacity of this particular project by $5 million. So the citizens' data and stories really moved the needle. And it was really being able to use IC Change in those technical ways to really move the needle alongside the stories, the compelling stories. But we're tired to talk about North Carolina because you guys are awesome. And we have this small investigation that we've been working on in North Carolina in partnership with the North Carolina Coastal Federation and Greenstream, which is a company that provides flood sensors, and they can have flood sensors that I don't know if y'all are familiar with the Feynman network of flood sensors across North Carolina. It's actually one of the best flood monitoring networks in the country, but they don't have flood sensors everywhere, right? So we thought we were going to potentially, we had a plan, an engagement plan that, of course, had to be delayed a little bit because of COVID, to use community stories on IC Change to inform the placement of 5 sensors in Wilmington. And we are still planning to do that. We've extended this effort for another year. And we are looking to y'all and anybody you might know in Wilmington who would join us in this effort to kind of understand where these where the community would want a flood sensor. And to have community data inform the location of that instrumentation. And again, these are kind of the folks that we've been working with in North Carolina. Again, Jim Gray is the CEO of Greenstream, and Todd Miller is from the North Carolina Coastal Federation. But here's a little bit more on how you might contribute to that particular investigation. These are the data entries. We would use a National Weather Service rain gauge. And then really we clock start and stop times. We do use radar and other data sources to validate it, but we know these storms can be real granular, and that start and stop time matters if you can provide it, but also flood and start and stop. And then we will be adding flood height to the metrics as well. And so you can do a lot with your phone to contribute. And we wanted to make sure we get a shout out to Max, who is one of our favorite IC changers, because he's also adding what it feels like to experience these events. It is over time, does start to wear on you if you're concerned about the way most people with their cars That's the second most important asset that most people own. And we drive them in streets, which are part of a drainage structure, drainage system. And most people don't think of streets that way, but that's what they are. So the more we understand how we adapt ourselves, our communities, our watersheds, and think of this as the environment and icy change, we discuss it and think of it in three ways. There's the natural, the built, and the social, and the human, and they are the same system. And the more we think of them as an integrated system, then the less siloed we are, and the more able we are to adapt to our climate change. So please join us. Please check us out on icychange.org. It is a wonderful community, and we really believe that the smartest sensor in the whole world is you. So thank you.
Julia, thanks so much. And Caroline, who's going to talk at the very end, will also give some more additional detail and a link to places where you can find investigative projects like yours. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Noah. Noah, you all ready?
I am. Thank you so much for having me. Wow, just fantastic presentations from you guys. So thank you so much. I've been riveted listening to you and Julia and Keisha. Fantastic. So thank you guys so much for having me. I believe you can see my screen now, and I'm just starting the slideshow, so I think we're all good to go. My name is Noah Newman, and I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Citizen Science Project called COCORAS. It's a funny acronym, but it stands for the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And so we are made up of people of all backgrounds and ages, from school kids all the way to retirees, professionals and amateurs alike, and we all put a rain gauge, just like what you see in the pictures or what I'm holding here, in our backyards or possibly where we work or at the school, and you can submit your data. So once trained, which I will be doing right here and right now at the end of this 10-minute segment, you're going to be trained and certified to the same degree as a NASA astronaut when it comes to measuring precipitation. But you'll be able to log into our website and submit your data that go immediately to maps and lists of data that you yourself can tap into and analyze to your heart's desire. We even just recently put out this brand new map. It's interactive, and you can choose multiple dates at a time and see storms as they've come through. It's fantastic to see not only your dot on the map, but everyone else's as well. So we did start back in 1997 from a flood that occurred in Fort Collins, Colorado. That's where I'm sitting right now, and that's where we're headquartered. And I'm showing you a map here that's not a topographic map. This is actually rainfall in inches. And you can see on the west side of town, we received easily a year's worth of rainfall in this storm. Unfortunately, over here on the east part of town where the airport was, that's where the official rain gauge was. So as much as 2 inches in Fort Collins, Colorado is a huge deal, 14.5 inches is just unheard of. And what happened was a flash flood, and we had millions of dollars in damage. 5 lives were lost. And we realized that if we had some people that could have been throughout the community measuring rainfall, possibly able to alert the National Weather Service, we might have been able to save some lives. But we started this project, people began in Colorado, and now here we are 20 plus years later, and we've got 20,000 people in all 50 states, Canada, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, and we've got new countries knocking on our door all the time. Who uses the data? The biggest consumer of our data is the National Weather Service. So if you're looking at a map from weather.gov or any other National Weather Service map that has precipitation, there's very good likelihood that COCORA's data is embedded within that. But beyond the national level, local water managers will use COCORA's data for flooding, mosquito watch, lots of different uses all over the place for the use of COCORAs. I'll digress just for a moment here and mention, we're talking about climate change and climate data and 100-year events and, a 5-year storm. Where does that come from? Well, climate data comes from weather data. We need day-to-day people tracking things like rainfall, temperature, etc., where we can actually build that data to understand what the climate is doing, what's happening right here and right now. So I'm going to go into a very brief training session with you guys, and I know at the end of this, you'll have a chance to register with Kokoraz, and through a form you can tell Max your Kokoraz station ID, and he will get you one of these gauges. I must tell you though, these gauges have value. These are $40 with shipping, and so if you have the opportunity to get one of these, seriously, this is a high quality piece of equipment, and as I'm showing you here, the data are just gold. So where do I put my gauge? You know, a lot of us, we live in, whether it's a tight neighborhood or most people don't have a beautiful place to put their gauge. You want to do your best. That's really all that we can ask. So as long as your gauge can see the sky, you're doing something right. But ideally, you do want to get it as far away from trees and houses and possibly vandalism or sprinklers. But the last place you want to leave it is in the box. So please get it out. Get it to where it can see the sky, and you'll be on your way. You don't necessarily have to dig a hole and pour concrete. There are lots of different ways that people have come up with mounting their gauge, whether it's just in a Christmas tree holder like you see over here, or you can design a post that just sits on top of the ground and doesn't necessarily have to be dug in. This, for instance, is like a $3 post at your local hardware store that you can affix your gauge to. So very easy to do. When you join Kokoraz, you go to the upper corner of our website, kokoraz.org, you fill out the information, and you'll get an immediate email that'll provide you your station number and your login and password, and you'll be on your way to go. I'll tell you about how to read the gauge, and then I'll briefly tell you about how we report the data. So this rain gauge has 3 different pieces, and I'm going to actually stop sharing so we can see my larger screen here. And there's 3 pieces to the gauge. So you've got a funnel, and you've got an outer tube, and you've got the outer tube, and you've got the inner tube. And so the idea is that as the water pours into this outer cylinder, into this 4-inch diameter cylinder, it gets forced into this inner tube that actually exaggerates the water. So this inner tube, going all the way up to the top, is 1 inch of water. And I'll briefly show you kind of what I'm talking about here. I'm going to pour some water into my rain gauge. And let's say you had like a coffee can or something like that sitting out in your backyard, and you got a little bit of rainfall. How am I going to accurately measure this? I could take a ruler and stick it in here and measure and say, oh, you know, maybe it's less than 1/2 of an inch, maybe 2/10, maybe 3/10 of an inch. I don't know. But if I put my funnel over the inner tube and pour it in, makes a cool little tornado. We can see it fills it up. And what did we come to? 32 hundredths of an inch. 32 hundredths. So that's, in Colorado, that's a nice storm. I would take 32 hundredths any day. I know you guys get quite a bit of rain, sometimes over 1 inch. And that's kind of the follow-up question. What happens when it rains more than 1 inch? You can see when I put the rain gauge all together, the water fills up in that inner tube all by itself, and I can read my gauge. But if it rains more than 1 inch, what ends up happening? This thing starts overflowing. The first inch filled up, and then the rest of it started overflowing. So what do? I'm going to take out my inner tube. It's filled up with 1 inch. I pour it out. I write it down because I don't want to forget how many times I've done that. You put the funnel back over the inner tube. I've got 1 inch so far. I pour the rest in here. And what do I come up to? Not much more, about 5/6 hundredths of an inch. So our total for this storm in that example is 1.05. And that's how you'd submit it. So the bottom line here is that we need to be accurate. Everyone in the in this project is using the same style rain gauge, and we're submitting data to the 100th of an inch, which is the real important part here. So I'm going to share my screen now and get back to my presentation and zip through a lot of these slides quite quickly here. So I showed you how this inner tube works and how 1 inch equals 1 inch in that from the outer cylinder to the inner cylinder. Your most popular report most of the time, day in and day out, at least for me in Colorado especially, is 0. But 0 is important data. Drought scientists are very interested in where it did not rain. Or they might be looking at weather radar and they see what looks like rain falling in your area, but the rain doesn't always reach the ground. It might evaporate before it actually hits the ground. And so you on the ground can verify if you actually got rain or not that way. So you could also report a trace. If you got some rain, but not enough to reach that 100th of an inch, you would report a trace. We want to be accurate here, and we are scientists. This is real data. And so when you're reading the inner tube, you'll notice that the water can form what we all learned in middle school is the meniscus. And we want to read from the bottom of that meniscus because gravity and will pull the bottom of the water down while the surface tension kind of makes the water stick to the sides of the inner tube. And so that way we want to read from the bottom of the meniscus, and we don't want to round. So of course, between hundredths of an inch, that's one thing, but we don't, if you had 95 hundredths, don't tell us you had an inch. Tell us you had 95 hundredths. That's what we want to know with accuracy. Our typical report is once a day, usually in the morning, hopefully around 7 a.m. That's what usually helps the National Weather Service the best. Whatever you do, though, you make a habit of it. If you prefer midnight, that's great. Report at midnight every night. That's fantastic. So just make it a habit and submit your data. We've gone over how to measure more than an inch. This is what the data entry page looks like, and it's super easy. We also have a smartphone app, but once you log in, it defaults to the current day, and it actually defaults to a 0. You can hit submit or fill in your data, and it'll submit right away and go to the website. We really appreciate observation notes. So if it rained cats and dogs and you had 9 inches of rain in the last day, tell us so. Tell us a story. Don't just tell us I got 9.38 inches. We want to know if there was flooding, what happened, tell us some more details, and those data are helpful as well. There's other reports to do, and you can edit your reports. If you're gone for a day or more than a day, you forget, you can submit a multi-day. So don't worry about it if you're not around and can't do it each and every day. It's not required. The whole thing is optional. So if you only want to report when it rains, that's fine too. We do hail, we do snow. Those are more in-depth. That we have all sorts of training materials on our website that get you through that. But when you're participating in COCORAS, you get connections to scientists, not only National Weather Service people that are in your area, but your climatologists for your state. They're all connected to COCORAS, and they're happy to help answering questions. We've got social media, so you can meet others that are doing it. It's a lot of fun. We've got water festivals where we have games, shooting squirt guns at the rain gauges. So it's really easy to get involved. You go to the website, you're going to get a gauge through Max, and you've already attended a training, so you're ready to go. And I always end my presentations with saying we are cuckoo for COCORAS. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you having me.
Noah, thank you so much. The Museum of Life and Science is located in Durham, North Carolina, and so our next panelist I'm so pleased to introduce is from our local city government, so from our county government actually. So I'm so pleased to introduce our Durham County Sustainability Manager, Tobin Freed. Tobin, take it away. Uh-oh, I think you're muted, my friend.
You would think after 5 months of Zoom meetings, I would have that down. Excuse me. What interesting presentations. I really loved all that. I don't have any pretty pictures or photos to show, so you just get me talking. Max asked me to talk a little bit about local engagement and what that looks like and why that's important. And so I will say I'm the sustainability manager for Durham County. I've been in this role now for over 12 years. And Durham County and the city adopted a greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan back in 2007. And that's what created my position. And you can't manage what you don't measure. And that is really true. So a lot of what I do is dealing with data. And that data could be internal to our own fleets. It could be our own buildings. It could be our water treatment plants. But we need to know how much electricity are we using? What time of day are we using that electricity? How much different fuel are we using in our vehicles? And how many miles are we getting for that fuel? Things like that, to then say, all right, this is how much greenhouse gases we're emitting, and where can we shave that off? How can we get down? We do have a goal of 50% reduction by 2030, and how are we going to get to that goal? So we have to measure that, and then we have to continue to measure it and see how we're making progress. So that's a lot of what I do. I also work on waste and transportation and toxics and all sorts of other issues, but really focus a lot on the climate change and energy issues. So I also do work on resilience. That is a issue I work on. I'm sorry if that's a little noisy. And part of that includes our Triangle Regional Resilience Assessment. I think that we've talked about that a little bit over the course of this, but if not, I encourage you to all just Google that and look for it. It's on the Triangle J Council of Governments website, or I can put it in the chat afterwards. But that was local for Orange County, Durham County, and then Raleigh and Cary. And we looked at what are the threats we see. I think a lot of times people think, well, we're in the middle of the state. We don't really have to worry about sea level rise. We don't need to worry about, extra heat or things like that, mudslides or something up in the mountains. But what do we have going on here? And that assessment really showed, yeah, we do have impacts. We have impacts now, and we're going to continue to see impacts. And now part of my job is, okay, what are we going to do with that? I'm one person, so I do a lot of things in partnership. I'm lucky enough to get to partner with the museum, also partner with our hazard mitigation team, our emergency management team. They're wonderful. They just worked recently with Orange County and Alamance County, and I think a couple other counties, to update our hazard mitigation plan. They do that every couple years. And I was really pleased to see that they included a lot of information from our Triangle Regional Resilience Assessment in there, really talking about heat as one of our big issues for the first time that's ever appeared in our hazard mitigation plan. We also recognize wildfires, which a lot of people don't really think are a big issue around here, but they are a big issue when you think about the forests that we have around, how much forest we have, and how much those forests are more stressed than they used to be when we do have more drought, when we do have pests coming in, if we have a big windstorm and a lot of trees fall over. So that can be a big problem too. So data is really important to all of this, and I'm excited to have more people in Durham participating in IC Change and lots of collecting all the other data through the rain gauges and all of that, because I'm going to use that myself, which is great. I think that we also, we're about to, what we're working on right now is the next round of our community health assessment. We do this every 3 years through our public health department. And this is the first time ever we're going to have a chapter in there on climate change and public health and what those impacts are. Max is helping write some of that, and some of the data maybe from IC Change might show up in there too. So really helping people make those connections between public health and climate. So the things I think are important are to be involved in whatever works for you. So for some people, getting up at 7 and checking that rain gauge is just going to make their day. And that is awesome. We need more people doing that. That might not be everybody's thing. There are a lot of different ways to be involved, or you can do multiple of them. That's good too. So we do have an environmental affairs board here in Durham, which is a resident board that advises both the city council and county commissioners on environmental issues that range from really everything: environmental justice and waste issues, transportation, land use, a lot of energy and climate change work. I think there's some openings right now, and there's about to be another opening. So people who live anywhere in Durham County can apply for that. We also have other boards. We have an open space and trails commission. We have a bike ped commission. We have a planning commission. Lots of ways for people to get involved. I also just really think it's so important for people to do what you all have done, which is spend a little bit of time just understanding the issues. I know it's hard. We're getting so much information all the time from all directions. It's hard to set aside some time to just really listen and learn about something instead of just taking, what you saw on some Facebook post or, something like that. And it's really good to just understand the issues, and also understanding that I think Keshi said it, it's not one size fits all. And so what you saw that worked in New Orleans or in Colorado is not the same in Durham, North Carolina. We have a different climate, we have a different population. And so it's really important to not just take things that you hear everywhere and think they're going to work here. We have different regulatory systems. We have monopoly electrical companies, power companies. We have laws that don't let local governments control building codes, things like that are different than they are in other places. So I really encourage people to learn about that. The city and county have, I think once or twice a year, they run like college. It's kind of like this, but it's just to learn about how city and county government works and what the different departments do. It used to be called City College. I think it might be called something else now because the county does it too. But that's a really great way to learn about your local government as well. So I know we're cutting short on time. I'm going to leave it at that. But if anyone needs to find me, you can go to greenerdurham.net. And that's my website. My contact information's there, and lots of information there as well.
Tobin, thanks so much. I think there's some really amazing generalizable advice there on how to continue to be involved on a civic level and get involved with local government along climate change and sustainability lines. So thank you so much for joining us. We have one last panelist. Thank you all so much for spending so much time with us. I'm going to hand it over now to great friend of the whole series, Caroline Nickerson from SciStarter. Go for it.
I am a super fan, yes. And I'm actually only going to take a minute because the main time commitment for this is what you all will do offline. So I urge you all to minimize this Zoom right now. If you're on a computer, open up a tab. If you're on your phone, maybe click Safari or Chrome or whatever you're using and type in scistarter.org/NOAA, NOAA -life and science. Max just put the link in the chat as well. And on that page, you will find the links to all the YouTube recordings from the Museum of Life and Science. And then when you scroll to the bottom, you'll find COCORA's, IC Change, and some other citizen science projects that were selected just for you to get you started. So we urge you to make a SciStarter account and to start participating in these projects. When you make a SciStarter account, it's kind of like your passport to a bunch of other citizen science you can discover. And then you go to the IC Change website and the COCORA's website. And because they're SciStarter affiliates, the number and frequency of your contributions will track in your dashboard. So the main thing is just to get started, make those accounts, start taking data. IC Change is super user-friendly. I do it all the time. I'm probably gonna do it after this call. COCORA's, it's, like Tobin just said, it can be really fun. It can be the best part of your day to check it every morning, so you can make it part of your routine. And just first and foremost, thank you so much to all the panelists tonight, and thank you to you who are watching, the citizen scientists. I can't wait to see what you'll contribute.
Caroline, thank you so much. That concludes our 6-part series. Those of y'all that joined us over all 6 weeks, we are going to send out a form to either get your address or schedule a time for you to come out to the museum to pick up your certificate of completion and your rain gauge. I'm so excited for you to be able to get and use those. There's been a lot of incredible wisdom that was shared both tonight and over the past 6 weeks. And I don't feel as though I have a whole lot more to add other than, like Caroline just said, I am really, really, really excited for all of y'all to take some of this information and continue the conversation, but also continue with the civic action and continuing to collect data to help us better understand what life in North Carolina is and will be like through climate change. So later on this evening or tomorrow, you can expect another email from me with a form to figure out how to get you your certificate of completion and your rain gauge, and also so that you can explore that amazing story map resource and explore your decisions that you made about resilience in Rivertown. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to our panelists this evening. And of course, thank you so much for making some time to join us. That concludes our session tonight. Hope
Bye.
everybody has a
Thank
good
you.
rest of your
Always a joy. Have a great night.
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys.